Professor Udupi Rajagopalacharya Ananthamurthy looms large in the Kannada cultural world, both as a major literary figure and a significant cultural critic.
My writing, at no time did I feel I was writing purely literary works. I always had a feeling, here is a great moment in history and I have to give a full expression to it. There is a certain continuity in Kannada. You can see it in our folklore. You can see, for instance, in England, if somebody wrote poetry in the 12th century, it is unreadable today. But our 12th century idiom is my idiom. A movement like the Vachana movement, when there were some 5 or 6 people, and their discussion itself became a great Vachana movement. So we assumed that whatever we discussed in a small group in a coffee house had a dimension of changing the whole society. Although whether the people listened to it or not, it didn't matter. So that was the Navya movement.
In fact, one cannot dissociate his literary image from his iconic status in the cultural arena as a great cultural figure. Ananthamurthy was born on December 21st, 1932 in Melige village, Tirthahalli Taluk, Shimoga district. His parents were Satyabhama and Rajagopalacharya. Ananthamurthy's early childhood years were spent in Durvasapura and Mulabagar. It was during this phase that he was initiated into Sanskrit learning in a traditional manner in a mutt. Ananthamurthy was profoundly influenced by his father in his childhood.
ರಾಜಗೋಪಾಲಾಚಾರ್ಯರು ಮತ್ತು ಅವರ ತಂದೆ ಪದ್ಮನಾಭಾಚಾರ್ಯರು ಇಲ್ಲೇ ಇದ್ದರು. ಅನಂತಮೂರ್ತಿಯು ಇಲ್ಲೇ ವಿದ್ಯಾರ್ಥಿಯಾಗಿ ಓದ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದ.
ರಾಜಗೋಪಾಲಾಚಾರ್ಯದ್ದು ಅವ್ರ ಮೇಲೆ ಭಾಳ ಪ್ರಭಾವ ಇದೆ. ನಮಗೆ ಮೊದಲನೇ ಕುರ್ಚಿ ಸಿಕ್ಕಿದ್ದು ರಾಜಗೋಪಾಲಾಚಾರ್ಯರ ಮನೇಲಿ. ನನಗೆ ಅದೇ ಅವರ ಹೇಳಿದ ಉಪನಿಷತ್ತಿನ ಅರ್ಥ ಗೊತ್ತಾಗಲ್ಲ, ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು ಗೊತ್ತಾಗಲ್ಲ. ನನ್ನ ಕಣ್ಣಲ್ಲಿ ಧಾರಾಕಾರವಾಗಿ ನೀರು ಬಂದ್ಬಿಡ್ತು. ಜ್ಞಾನ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ, ತಿಳುವಳಿಕೆ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಿರಲ್ಲ, ಇದು ದೊಡ್ಡ ಜ್ಞಾನ, ಇದ್ರ ಮೇಲೆ ಜ್ಞಾನವೇ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ ಒತ್ತಿಡ್ಕೊಬಿಟ್ರೆ ನಾನು.
Ananthamurthy completed his lower secondary education in Tirthahalli and moved on to Mysore to complete his higher education there and even secured a gold medal in his master's program. During the early years of his teaching career, after completing his master's degree, he fell in love with Esther, whom he was to marry later on in 1961. Ananthamurthy left for England in 1963 on a Commonwealth Fellowship. It was in England that he wrote his first major novel, Samskara. Samskara went on to create major waves in Kannada culture and continues to remain a landmark text even to this day. Several universities in the West have Samskara in their curriculum.
ಯಾರು? ಚಂದ್ರಿ. ಅಯ್ಯೋ ಪಾಪ, ಇಲ್ಲೇ ಕೂತಿದ್ಯಾ? ಮಾರುತಿ.
Ananthamurthy always is a very interesting man in the sense that when anyone talks to him, he goes back home full of ideas. As a fiction writer, Ananthamurthy is unparalleled. Ananthamurthy is a great short story writer, and every young writer has drawn inspiration from some of his very beautiful stories. His stories and his novels will survive him for a long, long time in Canada. The history of Kannada literature of the 20th century is going to place him on a pedestal and speak of his fiction in glorious terms, and I am sure he deserves it.
Ananthamurthy has so far written 4 novels and has published 5 collections of short stories, 3 collections of poetry, 1 play, and 4 collections of critical essays. His last novel, Bhava, was released in 1994 by the famed sociologist, the late M.N. Srinivas.
ಇದನ್ನು ಓದ್ತಾ ಇರುವಾಗ ನನಗೆ ಪುಟ್ಟಪ್ಪನವರು ಕಾನೂನು ಸುಬ್ಬಮ್ಮ ಹೆಗಡ್ತಿ ಜಾಗ ಬಂತು. ವೈರಾಗ್ಯವನ್ನು ಓದ್ಸೋ ಟೈರಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ಹುಡುಗಿ ಎದುರುಗಡೆ ನೋಡಿದೆ, ಬಹಳ ಸುಂದರವಾಗಿ ಕಾಣಿತು.
Late Dr. D.R. Nagaraj, a famous critic in Kannada, asks Ananthamurthy to talk about the theme of sexuality in his works.
ಒಂದು ತುಂಟ ಕುತೂಹಲ ಏನು ಅಂದರೆ, ನಿಮ್ಮ ವೈಯಕ್ತಿಕ ಲೈಂಗಿಕ ಜೀವನ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಕಥೆಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಹೇಗೆ ಬಂದಿದೆ?
ಇನ್ನೂ ಬರಬೇಕು.
ಅಂದರೆ ಏನನ್ನ ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋಕೆ ಪ್ರಯತ್ನ ಮಾಡ್ತಿದ್ದೀನಿ ಅಂದರೆ, ಈಗ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಅತ್ಯುತ್ತಮ ಕಥೆಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಆಕಾಶ ಮತ್ತು ಬೆಕ್ಕು ಆಗಬಹುದು, ನವಿಲುಗಳು ಆಗಬಹುದು, ಗಂಡು ಹೆಣ್ಣಿನ ಸಂಬಂಧ ಅದರ ಅಂತಿಮ ಸಾರ್ಥಕ್ಯ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಆಗೋದು ಮದುವೆಯಿಂದ ಆಚೆಗೆ ಅಂತ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಕಥೆಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಆಲ್ಮೋಸ್ಟ್ ಒಂದು ವ್ಯಾಲ್ಯೂ ಅದು. ನನಗೆ ಕುತೂಹಲ ಏನು ಅಂದರೆ, ನಿಮ್ಮ ವೈಯಕ್ತಿಕ ಜೀವನದ ಒಂದು ದಟ್ಟವಾದ ಅನುಭವ ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಬಂದಿರಬಹುದಾ ಅಂತ.
ನಾನು ನನ್ನ ಹೆಂಡತಿಯನ್ನು ಮದುವೆ ಆಗಿದ್ದೇನೆ ಸುಮಾರು ಅವಳು ಗೊತ್ತಾಗಿ 10 ವರ್ಷದ ನಂತರ. ಆದ್ದರಿಂದ ವಿವಾಹ ಇಲ್ಲದೆ ಅಂದರೆ ಒಂದು ಚೌಕಟ್ಟಿಗೆ ಒಳಗಾಗದೆ, ಒಂದು ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆಗೆ ಒಳಗಾಗದೆ ಪ್ರೀತಿಯ ಸಾಧ್ಯತೆ ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ, ಅದನ್ನು ಸಾಮಾನ್ಯವಾಗಿ ನನ್ನ ವಾರ್ಗಿಯವರು, ನನ್ನ ಜಾತಿಯವರು ಇದನ್ನು ಅನುಭವಿಸಿ ಇರೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಎಲ್ಲ ಮದುವೆ ಒಳಗೇ ಅನುಭವಿಸಿರ್ತಾರೆ. ನಾನು ಅದ್ರ ಹೊರಗೇ ನನ್ನ ಸಂಬಂಧಗಳನ್ನು, ನನ್ನ ಹೆಂಡತಿ ಜೊತೆಗೂ ಇದ್ದ ಸಂಬಂಧ ಆ ಥರದ್ದು ಭಾಳ ವರ್ಷಗಳ ಕಾಲ, ಒಂದು 10 ವರ್ಷಗಳ ಕಾಲ ಅಂತ ಕಾಣುತ್ತೆ. ಅದೊಂದು. ಆಮೇಲೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಆಪ್ತರು, ಸ್ನೇಹಿತರು, ನನ್ನ ಸಂಬಂಧಿಕರು ಇವನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ಕಂಡಿರ್ತೀನಿ. ನನಗೊಂದು ವಿಚಿತ್ರವಾದ ರೀತಿಯ ನಾಲೆಡ್ಜ್ ಇದೆ. ಅದು ಬಂದಿದ್ದು ಹೇಗೆ ಅಂದರೆ, ನಾನು ಸಣ್ಣ ಅಗ್ರಹಾರದಲ್ಲಿದ್ದವನಾದ್ರಿಂದ ಸದಾ ಹೆಂಗಸರ ಜೊತೆ ಇರ್ತಾಯಿದ್ದೆ ನಾನು. ಅವ್ರ ಬಾವಿಗೆ ನೀರು ತರ್ತಾಯಿದ್ರೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಹೋಗಿ ಕೂತಿರ್ತಾಯಿದ್ದೆ. ಅವ್ರ ಬಟ್ಟೆ ಒಗೆಯೋಕ್ಕೆ ಹೊಳೆಗೆ ಹೋದರೆ ಅವ್ರ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಇರ್ತಾಯಿದ್ದೆ, ಭಾಳ ಚಿಕ್ಕ ವಯಸ್ಸಿನಲ್ಲಿ. ಆಮೇಲೆ ನಾನು ಅಮ್ಮನ ಹತ್ರ ಬಂದು ಎಲ್ಲ ಮಾತಾಡೋರಲ್ಲ, ಎಲ್ಲ ಹಿತ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಬರೋರು. ಇದನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ಬರೆದಿದ್ದು ನಾನು.
ಈ ಲೈಂಗಿಕ ಸಮಾಗಮ ಅನ್ನೋದು, ಸಂಭೋಗ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಒಂದು ಪರಾಕಾಷ್ಠೆಯಲ್ಲಿರುವ ಸೃಜನಶೀಲ ಚಟುವಟಿಕೆಯಾಗಿ ಬರುತ್ತೆ. ಅಂದರೆ ಸಾಂಪ್ರದಾಯಿಕರ ಪ್ರಕಾರ ಒಂದು ಅನೈತಿಕವಾದ ಗುಣ, ಅಥವಾ ಅನೈತಿಕ ಅಂದರೆ ಇಮಾರಲ್ ಅನ್ನೋ ಅರ್ಥದಲ್ಲ, ಎ ಮಾರಲ್ ಅಂದರೆ ನೀತಿ ಅನೀತಿಯ ಆಚೆಗೆ ಇರುವ ಒಂದು ಸೃಜನಶೀಲ ಚಟುವಟಿಕೆಯಾಗಿ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಕಥೆ ಕಾದಂಬರಿಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಸಂಭೋಗ ಸಮಾಗಮ ಬರುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ನಿಮ್ಮ ವೈಯಕ್ತಿಕ ಜೀವನದಲ್ಲೂ ಇದೇ ನಿಲುವನ್ನು ನೀವು ಪಡೆದಿದ್ದವರ ಹೇಗೆ?
ಯಾವತ್ತೂ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಒಂದು ಕಾರಣ ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ. ಇದು ನಾನು ಲೋಹಿಯಲ್ಲಿಂದ ಕೇಳಿದ್ದು ಅಂತ ಕಾಣುತ್ತೆ. ಮನುಷ್ಯನಿಗೆ ಅವನ ಭಾವಜೀವನವನ್ನು ಅಲ್ಲಾಡಿಸುವ ಮತ್ತು ಅವನನ್ನು ಒಂದು ಪರಾಕಾಷ್ಠ ಸ್ಥಿತಿಗೆ ತೊಗೊಂಡು ಹೋಗೋದು 2, ದೇವರು ಮತ್ತು ಹೆಣ್ಣು ಅಂತ. ಇವು 2ಕ್ಕಾಗಿ ಮನುಷ್ಯ ತಲೆ ಕೆಡಿಸ್ಕೊಟ್ಟು ಹುಚ್ಚಾದಂಗೆ ಇನ್ಯಾವುದಕ್ಕೂ ಆಗಲ್ಲ. ಆಮೇಲೆ ನನಗೆ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಗೊತ್ತಾಯಿತು ಏನು ಅಂದರೆ, ನಮ್ಮ ಅಪ್ಪ ಎಲ್ಲ ಆ ಥರದ ಸಾಹಸ ಜೀವನವನ್ನು ನಡೆಸಿದ್ರು ಕೂಡ ನಾನು ಇದ್ದಿದ್ದು ಬಹಳ ಮಣಿವಂತ ಕುಟುಂಬದಲ್ಲೇ. ಒಂದು ಮಣಿವಂತಿಕೆ ಆವರಣ ಇತ್ತು. ಮನುಷ್ಯ ಜಾತಿಯನ್ನು ನಿಜವಾಗಿ ಮೀರಿ ಹೋಗೋದು ನನಗೆ ಅನಿಸಿರೋದು ದೇವರ ಮೇಲಿನ ಪ್ರೀತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಮತ್ತು ಹೆಣ್ಣಿನ ಮೇಲಿನ ಪ್ರೀತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ. ಗಂಡಸಿಗೆ ನಾನು ಹೇಳ್ತಿರೋದು ಅದು ಹೆಣ್ಣು ಅಂದರೆ ಅದು ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಥರ. ಅದು ಒಂದು ಕಾಮದ ಮುಖಾಂತರ ಮತ್ತು ದೇವರ ಮೇಲಿನ ಹಸುವಿನ ಮುಖಾಂತರ, ಈ 2 ಮುಖಾಂತರ ಈ ಎಲ್ಲ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆಗಳ ಕಟ್ಟುಪಾಡುಗಳು ಅರ್ಥಹೀನ ಅಂತ ಅನಿಸುತ್ತೆ. ಇಷ್ಟು ಕೂಡ ನಾವು ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿರೋದು, ಅದು ನಿಜವಾಗಿರೋದಲ್ಲ. ಆದ್ದರಿಂದಲೇ ನನಗೆ ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಬರೋ ಒಂದು ಪರಾಕಾಷ್ಠವಾದ ಒಂದು ಅನುಭವ ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ, ಅದು ಕೇವಲ ಲೈಂಗಿಕತೆ ಅಲ್ಲದಿದ್ದಾಗ ಮಾತ್ರ ಅದನ್ನೇ ನಾನು ಹೇಳ್ತಿರೋದು. ಅದು ಕೇವಲ ಒಂದು ತೂರಿಕೆ ಅಂತ ಇದ್ದಾಗ ಮಾತ್ರ. ಅದು ಒಂದಿದೆ, ಅದು ಅರ್ಥಹೀನವಾದ್ದು, ಅದು ಹೊರಟು ಹೋಗಿಬಿಡುವಂಥದ್ದು. ಅದು ವಯಸ್ಸಾದ ಮೇಲೆ ಉಳಿಯೋದು ಕೂಡ ಅಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಅದು ತೀಟೆ. ಅದಕ್ಕೊಂದು ತೀಟೆಯ ಸ್ವರೂಪವೂ ಇದೆ ನೋಡಿ. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಇದು ನಾನು ಹೇಳಿದ್ದು ಅದು ಸಂಕೀರ್ಣ ಅಂತ. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ತೀಟೆಯ ಒಂದು ಸ್ವರೂಪವೂ ಇರೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಅದು ಅದು ಕೇವಲ ತೀಟೆಯಾಗದೆ ಹಾಗೆ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಜೀವದ ಜೊತೆಯ ಅತ್ಯಂತ ಆಪ್ತವಾದ ಅತ್ಯಂತ ಹತ್ತಿರದ ಒಂದು ಸಂಬಂಧ, ನಮ್ಮನ್ನು ನಾವು ಮೀರಿ ಹೋಗುವಂಥ ಒಂದು ಸಂಬಂಧ. ಅದೊಂದು ಲೈಂಗಿಕತೆಯಲ್ಲೇ ಬಹಳ ಉಜ್ವಲವಾದ ಲೈಂಗಿಕತೆಯಲ್ಲಿರುವ ಒಂದು ಹುಡುಕಾಟ, ನಮ್ಮನ್ನು ನಾವು ಮರೆಯುವ.
Ananthamurthy has won several awards. The most important among them are the Jnanapith Award and the Karnataka Sahitya Academy Award. What we must recognize in Ananthamurthy's creative writings is an ambivalence about all institutional and social practices. In fact, there is hardly any work where Ananthamurthy, the artist, endorses any value or system as of absolute value. It is his searching examination of all historical processes that marks him as a great writer. Ananthamurthy has always been a part of all the major social and cultural movements that the state of Karnataka has witnessed.
ಅರೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಅನಂತಗೆ ಜ್ಞಾನಪೀಠ ಪ್ರಶಸ್ತಿ ಬಂದಿದೆ ಅಂತ ಭಾಳ ಹೆಮ್ಮೆನೂ ಆಯಿತು, ಭಾಳ ಸಂತೋಷನೂ ಆಯಿತು.
A great teacher, Ananthamurthy has travelled abroad extensively, delivering lectures at several universities in India and abroad.
Yes, Ananthamurthy was my childhood friend, and during his student career, he was very bright. He was supposed to be one of the best students, and he used to take part in all the debates and all the literary competition and all that. Even he was a good actor also.
A product of a literary movement called Navya, Ananthamurthy has responded with great clarity to all the political and cultural movements of his times. This is how he talks of his involvement with social movements while responding to a question from Professor Kiram Nagaraj, an important critic in Kannada.
After independence, movements have taken an important place in our culture. So I would like to hear what actually you feel about our cultural movements in Karnataka after independence.
There's something very unique about movements in Karnataka. Maybe it is not unique, it may be true of other areas in India. But in Karnataka, I have absolutely no doubt that all our movements, cultural movements, were also deep political movements. Take for instance Basava. It's a political movement, it's a cultural movement, it's a literary movement.
Social movement also.
Social movement, it's a spiritual movement. So all these are one. That's how Gandhi wanted all his movements to be. You know, Gandhi also wanted to bring in various other things, social, spiritual and ethical elements into his movements. Take our own case. You know, I grew up here in this district, Shimoga, and I was born in Tirthali, and my first real friend and mentor also was Gopal Gowda. And if we talked about Karl Marx and M.N. Roy and Lohia and Jayaprakash Narayan for half an hour, we would talk for 1 full hour on Kumarvyasa, on the Vachanakaras, on Bendre, on Kuvempu. So we wouldn't know where our political discussion began and where our literary discussions began. One would flow from one to the other. That was the kind of atmosphere in which I grew up. And hence, My involvement in the, there was a struggle here called Kagodu Raita Satyagraha, and Gopal Gowda was a very important fighter of that, and Ramanohar Lohi also came here.
Government is not caring for our movements. People, they are not interested in our movements. So what actually the fate of our movements?
That is an illusion that new capitalism has brought, and new technology has also brought. But those of us, or some of us, feel that this is only an illusion and this will end. But what should be the nature of the movements hereafter? Until now, you know, I may be very unpopular when I say it, many of our movements were for material things, for sharing, which were right because there were few and there are not many, and so it had to be shared, and then who gets what, you know, the more powerful got everything. It was right that it should be based on materialistic considerations. But I think the future, if there are great movements which are going to succeed, they will be material plus spiritual in nature. It will be mostly on the basis of alienation of the human person between him and nature, between humanity and the rest of the animal world, the rest of the world. So there will be a spiritual dimension, perhaps to a new movement. There are indications of it everywhere. Take for instance the ecological movements. Take for instance people who speak for the preservation of the tribal dignity, for the human dignity. Many times if you try to translate those movements in purely material terms, you lose. They will get a spiritual dimension because the human person wants peace, wants fulfillment, wants to be creative, and the modern technology and the modern management techniques, the modern information flow, everything has brought about a false consciousness in us, everything is all right. But this will end. Humanity will get fatigued, terribly fatigued. It will feel, you know, that we are totally alienated. And there will be movements. There are already movements of this kind which are minority.
Here is Ananthamurthy receiving the Padma Bhushan from the President of India. Ananthamurthy started the total literacy campaign when he was the Vice Chancellor of the Mahatma Gandhi University in Kottayam between 1987 and 1991. Ananthamurthy has always had a deep interactive relationship with all writers in India and abroad. He has continuously looked for new forms of awareness in his interaction with writers, with the belief that truly creative writers search for alternatives without taking up dogmatic positions.
First I read new novel, contemporary novel, modern novel, that was Samskara. In that way, through Samskara then I tried to understand Ananthamurthy. And as a friend, he is a very encouraging man. I think he encourages everyone. That is why he is a maestro. Maestro always helps all his disciples. I may be contemporary, but in literature, Kannada literature, I am the student of him.
I remember him for teaching not only English literature, but the entire culture. He connected the English literary studies to the contemporary issues. He connected English literary studies to Kannada literature as a whole. And therefore, he shaped the sensibilities of my generation.
While I was planning to adopt Gatashraddha, what fascinated me very much is the structure of the film, the story itself. The story on one level is the story of one young widow, Yamunakka, who tries to keep her integrity intact in the very hostile environment of the traditional Brahmin society. But the story also has another aspect to it, that is, it operates like a metaphor. It uses archetypal images. In fact, Yamunakka can be seen as a reinterpretation of Shakuntala.
The major works of Ananthamurthy have been translated into many Indian and European languages. Samskara itself has been translated into several European languages, getting universal recognition in the cultural circles of the West. It has also been prescribed as a text by the Harvard University. Ananthamurthy was the chairman of the National Book Trust of India between 1992 and 1993. And he was the president of the Central Sahitya Academy between 1993 and 1998. It was during his tenure as the president of the Academy that the idea of autonomy as recommended by the Haksar Committee was executed fully.
Let's begin the conversation from this thing of articulation. Your articulation as an individual and the problem of articulation as a writer.
Yeah, I agree with you. I have some Dalit writer friends, and when you discuss ideas, they are not articulate. But when they create something, they are much more articulate than people who are articulate. So I know the value of stuttering. It's a kind of stammering. I've always felt that a great poet like Allama stammers, and hence he has all kinds of devices, metaphorical and so on. Because whatever is said easily and out of habit may not reveal the inner workings. And hence our ancients talked of dhvani. Dhvani again, points at a certain kind of a gap between what you said and what you intend, which is resonated. So I want to achieve that resonation.
You have called one of your short stories as Mauni, the silent. And why did it fascinate you, this aspect?
It is similar, because I was thinking about that. There are two characters, one who is very articulate, he can articulate all his feelings, and the other who becomes silent. And the silent one is much more articulate than the one who articulates. We inherit these ideas also. For me, for instance, when I first read King Lear, Cordelia is a very moving character because she is not as articulate as Goneril and Regan. And even Shakespeare associated sometimes full articulation with some kind of insincerity. That a certain kind of sincerity would lead you to silence. And I have heard even great musicians, feel that silent moment is more charged with musical feelings.
You've now become a very famous writer. I'm so famous that probably there are
maybe just one or two writers living in India now who are as well known as you are, and how are you handling the fame? Does it become embarrassing? Do you get irritated with the fame? And how does it come in the way of your writing? Does it come in the way of your writing?
Yes, it does. Because after Samskara, when the novel became very famous, for a long time I couldn't write because I felt afraid to write. I get affected by that kind of thing. But now that kind of thing doesn't affect me, but every new beginning is a new beginning. I mean, your fame and whatever people say about you doesn't really help you. You have to become naked again, you see, and deal with the deepest in you. And so fame comes in the way. Because many of us may also begin to believe in our own fame and then write something which may also be liked by people because you are famous and you know that it is false. That can happen.
Kannadigas are a little angry with you that you have not written in the last couple of years. You should write. And what is it that is coming up now?
I want to write something, and there are many pages I have written and torn it. That's why I said each beginning is a new beginning. You should not repeat yourself. Yeah. The worst thing is begin to imitate yourself, all that. And you should shut up when you can't write.
Ananthamurthy cannot be regarded as a mere literary figure whenever the history of Indian literatures or of Kannada literature is going to be recorded or written about. None can ignore his tremendous forays into cultural and political issues in a manner that never ever simplified complex questions relating to the organic life of the individual, the community, and the society at large. All his explorations as a creative writer and as a literary and cultural critic have foregrounded the major debates of our times without ever brushing aside any aspect for reasons of convenience and safety. In a sense, Ananthamurthy has been a rigorous critic of all the dominant choices of our society and institutions that have tended to marginalize those at the periphery of modern civilizational constructs. But Ananthamurthy has never rejected any system or patterns of modern existence in a simplistic manner to avoid getting into uncomfortable positions. It is for this reason that his creative works manifest themselves as great interrogations of the history of our times, making Ananthamurthy, the creative writer, a radical who does not endorse mainstream history even when he works within its inevitable real parameters. In a very fundamental sense, the creative writings of Ananthamurthy uphold the profound skepticism of the Indian philosophical traditions that reject finality of any kind. Neti, neti, not this, could very well be regarded as the vision that is engendered by the works of Ananthamurthy, who works through history to transcend it with the power of metaphors. Eventually, it is for a multi-dimensional metaphorical vision that Ananthamurthy will be remembered by all.